So if your wife has been getting into sourdough lately, maybe talking about getting chickens, or maybe even started canning.
Well, looks like it's time to upgrade to an acreage property.
Welcome back to another video, Living in Fort Collins. I'm Izzy Olson.
I'm Connor Martin.
And today we're going to be talking about acreage and rural properties in northern Colorado. And Connor's on here today because he is our acreage enthusiast on our team. And so we're going to be diving in a little bit deeper on acreage and rural properties here in northern Colorado.
Yeah, and if you're looking to get a little more separation, a little more elbow room away from your neighbors and friends and family, this is the way to go.
Spoken from the mountain man himself.
So one of the first topics I come up with when it comes to trying to figure out what type of acreage someone is looking for is going to be location. Location-wise doesn't mean what town you want to be in, because every town has some type and form of acreage. But it really comes down to, are you looking for a mountain property where you have rocks, great views, you have hills, you can go sledding? Or are you looking more for that rural feel where you're still on an acreage, but you're minutes from town and you're close to everything? Or you could be on the hillbilly ideology and go way out east and find yourself on a 45 piece of acreage out by yourself on a flat piece of land where the wind blows through your hair and you enjoy your life.
You kill me. All right. Speaking of towns within, whether it's mountains, plains, city living that you're looking for, Livermore, LaPorte, and Bellevue are going to be more your mountain foothills living, as well as Loveland and Berthoud. Loveland and Berthoud also can give you that city feel where you still have the amenities, but you may be on 5+ acres. And then there's Fort Collins, which I'd say foothills and city.
Yep.
And then all Windsor, Johnstown, and Wellington are going to be your plains, where the wind isn't a joke. And the further east out you go, the more windy it's going to be, but it gives you that really open space feel, and often going to be able to find 40+ acres if that's what you're looking for. And then if you want to get real plainsy, Carr and Nunn are other options as well.
Yep, it just depends. Do you want that Wyoming feel? Do you want that Colorado feel? Do you want the Nebraska feel? Or do you want that city life feel?
The next thing to consider is the lot size you're looking for and the cost associated with that. And it may not be exactly what you're thinking. So you may think a 30-acre parcel of land would cost more than a 5-acre parcel, but that is typically not true. And why is that?
Well, the biggest thing is, you know, here in Colorado, one of the toughest things to deal with is subdividing properties. A lot of our acreages start off with 35-acre parcels. And so in Colorado, back in the early days, probably in the 70s, 80s, probably starting into the 90s, you were able to go out and subdivide a lot easier than it is today. So the subdivision of properties is becoming less and less as we continue to go down this new road where we're wanting to keep acreages larger, not have as many small ones. And that's what's causing this big discrepancy between, you can go out and find a 35-acre property for $300,000, $400,000, but that 5-acre property as well that someone subdivided 30 years ago could be at the same cost, because some individuals out there, a 35-acre piece of property,
It's too much.
It is a lot of property when you're out there.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work to maintain that if you're thinking you're going to try and maintain that. And I would say out of that 35 acres, you might only use 5 to 6 of it.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it is just that elbow room so that you don't have to have that neighbor right next to you while you're peeing outside and enjoying life.
Right. And so for those looking for maybe like a hobby farm, or they just want to have maybe some chickens, maybe a horse, 5 acres is more what some people are looking for, where others are looking for those larger parcels that are going to be further out from town. And that also affects the price. So a big thing to think about is, what do you want to use the property for? And the usability of the land. So if you were looking at, for example, Bonner's Peak in Livermore has, 40-acre plots?
Yeah, 35 to 40 acre plots. Yep.
But you can't use it all, because you have the rocks, the hillside. So great for cows if you want to throw some cows up there. But
yep, great for your horses as well.
Yeah.
But if you're thinking of agricultural uses, wanting to have a garden up there, you're going to have to do a lot of soil supplements in there. You have to put barns in, and, you know, depending on the terrain, I mean, there's not many flat lots up there as well. So you have to be ready to know that your lot's always going to be sloped. So you might put your barn really far away, which I did a sale up there just last year on that side. And the fact of going down to the barn was super easy.
Yeah,
The idea of coming back up to the house from the barn was a heck of a walk. And I'd much rather have a little, skis tow rope to bring me back up versus trying to make that walk.
Right. Whereas there's some places that we've seen recently in Loveland that are 5 acres, totally flat. You could use every square inch of that lot. So it's just things to consider. Both have its positives and negatives. I'm a bigger acreage kind of gal personally, but I think I could handle the 5.
I want 75 acres so I can just go out there and look at my things all
50
spread
minimum.
out. And I'd have that 35 acres, and I'm a hoarder, so I'd have like a trailer here, a trailer there, a shop that I brought from someone else's property, maybe a couple old tractors that I couldn't, refuse to not want to buy.
That's so funny. So another thing to consider is the closer you are to urban areas, the more expensive it's going to be, just because of convenience. So the average price of a property in town is going to be $300,000 to $400,000 for vacant pieces of land undeveloped. Where if you're further out, $195,000 plus.
Yep. So like if you start going up into the foothills, the mountains, that's where you can start seeing some really good discounts. Man, I've seen some, and there's some negatives about it, which we'll talk about later on that side, but you can get them even cheaper on that side. I've seen a couple that are in the $95,000 range. It can be a challenge to get things under, $100,000 out here in Colorado, just depending on if you're over an acre or over 2 acres. And that's a lot of times is where you're going to be a good 35 to 55 minute drive from a town to go get your groceries. And so it's that balance of how far you're willing to drive and what you want amenity-wise around you. And the other big factor about like being in that urban side as well is the fact of the utilities, which we will also discuss later too, is having water lines, having electricity lines, having good internet. Those also do play a major factor in the cost of that property. And it might not be things that you can see while you're out there, and it's things you have to dig into as you look into properties and see what that true value is and where they're getting it from.
Yeah, totally. And if your whole goal is just a lot of acreage and you don't care where, the further out east you go, the more opportunity you're going to have for that. And last, a thing to consider is going to be the last 2 things: utility improvement, which Connor just touched on. We're going to talk about it more in depth in a little bit. That's going to really affect the cost of the land and the cost to develop the land if it doesn't have any utilities already. And then, or even a home that has a house on it, but maybe a utility that you would wish you had something different. And we'll explain that in a little bit. But then also the different zoning types. So open zoning is the most favorable. You can basically do whatever you want. And so you could have commercial, farming, you could have a farm stand if you wanted, greenhouse, RV park. I mean, we're trying to think of the cons of open zoning, and
it's so minimal on that side. Open zoning, if it's kind of the holy grail of acreage properties, is how I look at it. There's few and far between on that side, and it's kind of weird where some of them are at, where it's just like, well, this doesn't seem like this should be an open zoning. It should be more agricultural, but someone either took the time to go in and get it rezoned, or it got grandfathered in at some point. And so finding those, if you ever run into them and you see the cost, typically they're going to be more expensive than like an ag zoning or a urban residential zoning as well, urban residential zoning as well, and some of those other ones, just because there are some tax benefits and some different things you can do with the property where on ag and on other zonings you just can't do it.
Yeah. And so speaking of that, with ag residential or ag zoning, is the taxes can come down the taxes are favorable if you're using it for ag purposes. If you're not using it for ag purposes, then the taxes are going to be higher. So you definitely want to be using the land for what it was meant to be used for.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things too, because for most of us who want to do an acreage, just like we talked in the beginning, like having chickens, having horses, having some goats or donkeys, there are restrictions in Larimer County, in Weld County, and other counties that dictate how many animals you can have on the property per acreage. I mean, when you do cows, there's a certain acreage that you have to have for a cow. So knowing those laws and what county you're in and what type of zoning your property has, that contributes to what you can actually put on that property. And there are still restrictions, even though it's a heck of a lot less of a restriction than you are the closer you get to a town.
Right. Yeah. And so then with the last major zoning is rural residential.
Yep.
And so basically with that, you don't have to worry about are you using the land for commercial ag purposes, right?
Yep.
So the taxes aren't as big of a deal. But then, like you said, restriction on number of animals can be a con, which would be a huge con for me. I'd feel like, no thanks.
Yeah, the fact that you brought chickens to your house in Wellington still surprises the heck out of me on that side.
Why?
The people that have chickens in Fort Collins, I'm sitting there saying, I can't believe they got away with it. And there's no HOA, but I don't know, having chickens as a neighbor right behind you, I'm sitting there saying,
No, but
man, that would be tough.
There's no rooster, though.
And there's just still something about having a chicken farm right next to you, even though it's a small chicken farm of 8 chickens.
Listen, your identity doesn't make sense to me, because if you're living in Wellington, you should expect to hear chickens and see horse poop in your neighborhood.
I agree in that, but when you're two streets down from the main block, I don't know. It's just, I'm more like, keep the urban, keep this, the acreages to acreages usage.
We can agree to disagree on that one. And next, big consideration when looking at rural or acreage properties, whether there's an existing build on the home or not, is utilities and infrastructure. And this is where the cost can really add up. And so the first thing I do want to add is, for all the utilities we're going to be talking about, the further you are from the road, the more expensive utilities would be to put in if your property didn't have any already. And so that's why you often see a lot of homes. You're like, why do they build it on the road? And it's because it's the most affordable way to get utilities to your property. So obviously, like, if you see a home way up on the hill of a property, then those people had money and did a great job.
Yeah. Some people will put their money in to bring that privacy in, where a lot of people realize that value, that monetary value you get from having that property further in. Road maintenance is always an issue. Yeah, bringing in gas, electricity, all those features. Or you have to give in that give and take and bring propane in. And so the closer you have it to the road, the more likely you are to have the better utilities for long-term use versus having to kind of subdue for other utilities like propane or solar power or things like that, where some of those places, when you get up to the mountains, you're off grid at that point. You have a solar power, you have electricity banks. Those are the only things that you can actually do in some of those places, where a lot of these individuals like, well, shoot, I got an Excel gas line sitting right here. Why wouldn't I tap into that and use it until they realize what the cost is?
Yeah, which we're going to go into. Some of them I knew, but some of them are a little wild to me. So the biggest thing I always like to bring up, especially when I've had a few clients recently interested in land, and the biggest thing I always talk about is water.
Yep.
That's huge.
It's one of the biggest things in Colorado that you're going to run into.
Yes. And so the 3 options is, and not every property is going to have the 3 options, but it's the 3 types of water sources you can have: a city tap, cistern, and a well. And so the city tap, that's going to be in more your suburban areas where you're going to tap into the city water district or whatever that is available nearby. The pro is that it's constant, clean, filtered water. The con is the cost of the tap is gaudy. And you still have to pay your monthly bill on top of that. So.
Yep. No, I was going to say, bringing the tap in is one of the toughest things. And depending on where you are, water district wise, for example, Wellington, some of the areas on the north side of Fort Collins had a moratorium on bringing water in, because the city of Fort Collins or Larimer County might not have the sufficient amount of water to even bring to your property on that side. So if you can get a water tap put in on a property, to a certain regard, I believe it is a good idea to do it, because you have that consistent water. You don't have to worry about the well maintenance or a cistern maintenance or any of those things. Mm-hmm. And the fact is you always have water.
Never have to worry about it.
The only issue that I've ever seen with wells, and I've only seen it once happen up in the mountains, and so I know there's other cases out there. It was a shared well between 2 places. One was an Airbnb. Another one was just a family cabin that's been there forever. They shared a well, and the Airbnb ran the dry well.
Oh my gosh.
The well dry.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
And so that became a major issue, and it's rare when your well runs dry, but that is always a possibility when you do a well out here.
Right. Totally. And one thing to consider, I've seen a few listings recently where the tap has already been paid for, which is huge.
Yes.
What is that? You said 100 and...
Yeah, depending on what district you're in, water-wise, it can go up to $120,000 to do a water
value.
Tap there. Yeah,
huge value.
Yeah, between probably mid $60,000 up to $120,000, depending where you're at,
crazy.
Just for the water tap alone to bring in, and that doesn't include obviously your monthly fee that you're paying for water, which if you're irrigating or doing any of that kind of stuff, which also has restrictions on acreage properties depending on what your square footage is and what you want to water, it becomes more of a problem too as well.
Yeah. So moving on to cisterns, which I would say are probably the least popular.
So you got to experience one out at, I think, was that in Wellington or none? Okay,
Wellington.
so that actually surprised me to see that, because I normally never see them out there.
Well, so the reason is, and we'll get it when we get into wells, we'll talk about it a little bit more, but the reason is because the neighboring properties on the west side, they were digging 25 feet down and had a pretty good GPM. On the around this property, 800 to 900 feet deep.
That's an expensive
and like
well.
a gallon per minute that wasn't sufficient. So they just chose to put money into building the house and the shop and put a cistern in instead.
Yep.
So, but with a cistern, now it's the lowest cost and quickest to put in, and you can put multiple in. So, you know, obviously if you just have one, then you're going to be filling that up pretty often. And there are less restrictions in terms of like permitting and codes and things of getting those in. The biggest con is that you have to haul your water or get it delivered. And unless if you're like money bags, you're going to be hauling it because delivery is expensive. And so we did find 2 places, Wellington and Fort Collins. I mean, I would say every city has a water. It's called a water reclamation facility,
Yep,
right?
that's exactly it.
And so $13 to $15 per 1,000 gallons. And it allows you to be off-grid, which is nice. Another big con is just risk of contamination and needing to take care of it, because that could be
keeping that
deadly.
cistern clean and keeping that water clean and testing it. It's like owning a hot tub. I was just talking to my dad about this last night. Owning a hot tub is like owning a horse. You know, you're constantly having to clean it. You're constantly having to test it. You're constantly having
That's
to
not
feed
true,
it chlorine.
Connor.
You're always having to feed it electricity and heat. I owned a horse at one point.
No,
so I
when
know.
did you own a horse?
I owned one in Parker, Colorado. It was my sister's. She did a terrible job taking care of it, so me and my dad's responsibility was to take care of that horse. And I'll tell you, a hot tub is very similar to it. I know Izzy's never owned a hot tub. I
grew up in a house with a hot tub, and I've had my own horse. Thank you.
Just think about, every day having to add chlorine in. It was just miserable.
Okay, we're not going to get into that, but if you have a young horse, you don't need to do anything. They just eat the hay and eat the grass and drink their water, and they don't need anything. Anyway, moving on. Wells. Don't talk about horses like that.
I'm an expert.
No, he's not, though, is the thing.
Acreage expert, horse expert. Just talented all the way around.
Yeah, right. Humble, too. Last, wells. These, I would say, are the most popular choice that people want.
Yep.
When they're looking for acreage properties, they want that, what is that word called? Self-sufficiency of having a well, not having to depend on the city,
Not having to pay that dang city bill every time you use water.
Right.
The fact I can go take a shower for however long I want and not think I'm going to rack up a bill on that other than electricity.
Right.
It's a dream. A 40-minute shower sounds nice. I just can't afford it on the city water tap.
That's ridiculous.
I have 2 50-gallon hot water tanks for a reason.
Oh my gosh. Well, yes, so you can control your own water. You do not have to pay for it, except electricity, like he said. Great taste and more minerals, which could be good for you. The con is risk of contamination.
Yep.
Maintenance on the pump, high install costs, and the biggest con, I would say, is the unpredictability of the Colorado water table. Like I was saying, at that property in Wellington that I was at, 25 feet on one side of the road, 700 feet on the other. And so you don't know how far you have to dig down. There's no way to test beforehand. You have a company start digging, and then it starts to get really expensive if you get too deep. And then you can't guarantee how much water is going to come. So you may need to add a cistern in to help with that.
Yep.
So that's really the biggest. Now, if there's a well already and she's a gusher, as I recently met someone who explained hers to be a gusher, then that's awesome, right?
Yep, that is perfect. And that's where having a well already dug on a property, even if it's vacant, it has no house on it, one of the big things that I've seen up in the mountains, especially on that side, is, there was a big fire that happened up there. Houses burned down. But they cap the well, they have it there, and then they have at least an idea or a permit that states, hey, this well is 300 foot deep, you have a certain gallons per minute that's coming out of it, so you're getting into something you're already involved with. If you go to a vacant piece of ground out in the middle of nowhere,
no clue.
Yeah, you're just on a guess, and that well company will definitely come out there and start drilling for you. They'll give you a fixed cost, but then it's going to cost you X amount per feet afterwards if you don't hit something. And so it's kind of a lottery game when you get into building a well in certain areas where it's just like, well, I got the first 300 feet paid for $30,000, and then everything past that I'm paying X amount for every foot I dig, and it could be 600 feet, could be 900 feet. That's a lot of money to start risking on and gambling on for water, especially because when you're in contract or purchasing a property, you can't go out there and start digging for a well and be like, nope, sorry, this ain't going to work for me. I've already spent too much.
After purchase, you find that out.
Yep.
And you could hit the well, have good water, and then it tastes like crap. So then you have to do some stuff to
Yep. And then you're starting to bring filters in, and I've seen that at properties where you're having to replace filters all the time just to keep the water clean and keep it nice. And yeah, some people are just very particular about how their water tastes. You know,
Right.
I'll drink it out of a stream any day with a little straw and be just fine with it while I camp. But
That's
I understand
Connor.
other people that where they don't enjoy that nearly as much.
Next utility we're going to talk about is sewer. So your two options are city sewer or septic. City sewer, I mean, the perk is you can put anything down it. You don't have to be careful. Obviously, you still don't want to do those like flushable wipes and stuff, but less maintenance to worry about, and it's really not your problem unless the sewer line on your property, something was wrong with it.
Yep.
And then for the septic system, if the property does not already have one, 7 to 12K to put one in, would you say?
Yeah, that's roughly what it was. Yeah, I did one 2 years ago at this point, and we spent, gosh, I think we were right around 14K, but we had to do extra work on it because we built over an existing one, so it just costed just quite a bit more for us. But for an average tank, that's probably what you're going to be looking for, and leach field.
And leach field, yeah. And which I just learned about those yesterday. And they kind of gross me out. They're not gross, I know. But you need to be careful of the cleaners you put down because you want to protect the enzymes that are working in the septic system. I did grow up with one.
Okay.
And then you need to pump out the septic every 3 to 5 years. So there is more maintenance. But would you say there's a preference between sewer or septic most people have?
You know, so for me, sewer-wise, if you're going through the city sewer line, you know, you're paying a charge for that. So every time you run that tap or water and stuff, they're going to charge you X amount for what you're using sewer-wise.
Right.
And so that's kind of the negative. So I don't really care for that. So if you have a septic system, it's on your own merit. The only downside to the septic that I really see, other than the enzymes and having to clean it out, which is very minimal on that side, is the fact that a leach field can eventually get clogged, or there can be an issue with it in the leach field or within the septic tank. And so repairs might need to be necessary. I've seen leach field and septic tanks go for a really long time, 50, 60 years before they ever need to be touched. And even then, they've gone even longer than that. So more than likely, if you had the option, septic is the way to go, in my opinion. It's just simpler, unless you just love using chemicals to clean your toilets and other things like that, and you want to make sure that it's sparkly clean. If you're like a germaphobe freak.
Oh my gosh,
like
Connor!
That might be a little bit more of a challenge.
Listen, not everybody that's watching wants the mountain man lifestyle. Some just want 5 acres in town, city water, city sewer, city electric. But anyway.
Yeah, you just spit it into the toilet, rub it with the brush, and you call it good.
Gosh, you kill me. Gas is the next utility, and so your two options are going to be either propane or Northern Colorado XL gas. Black Hills Energy though is.
They do have that as well.
Yeah.
So
Black
depending
Hills
on where
is
you're at.
more north, but
Yep.
there's not many gas companies. So propane is the more likely choice in Colorado. Connor said about 85% on propane.
Yep.
So the pro is that it's cheaper to put in to your property.
Propane?
To add the tank,
Yes,
instead of
it is.
in.
It's way cheaper.
So install wise, it's cheaper.
Yep.
Okay. So you can put it anywhere on the properties, which means you can put your house anywhere on the property if you are building. So it gives you more flexibility with that. You don't have to worry about the expense of running the lines from the gas line and wherever that is to the home. The con though is over time, it is more expensive for propane than it would be to have natural gas. So you do need to be more conservative with the heating, cooling, cooking in your home. And then obviously you have to make sure that you keep it filled up, where with a gas line, you never have to worry about that.
Yep, that constant gas flow. If you can get a gas line on a property, I 100% recommend that all the time on that side. I think having gas to a property is so important if you can do it, and it brings such a value to the property. But like I said, 85% of it's going to be propane, for the fact that we don't have gas lines that run all over Colorado. They're very strategic on where they put them. They put them towards the path of growth where Fort Collins or whatever city you're in is at. And so the further you go out, the less likely it is going to be that you're going to have a gas line there. So propane is your only option. It's not a negative option on that side. We have companies that can come out and deliver it on an annual basis to you. They typically, a 1,000-gallon tank can last you about 6 months to 7 months on that side based off of individuals who have lived on propane out here. And the biggest thing is you just have to be restrictive on what you use it for. You know, you don't want to be running your AC at 65 degrees all summer long because you want to have it cool and stuff. More than likely throwing in a whole house fan and leaving your windows open during the nighttime and then having it heat up during the daytime is going to be your better option if you're on propane.
And that runs about $700 to $900 to fill up that 1,000.
Yep, that has been the average. And then the other thing, just a quick mention, is, you know, people here will specifically wait for the cheaper prices for propane to fill their tanks. So there's certain times of the year where it actually is cheaper to fill it. And so there's peak times where it's very expensive. So most people have a set schedule with a company to do it twice a year is how I've seen it.
Oh, cool. Okay. And then you can either own your propane tank or lease it. And if you're going to lease it, you're paying about $35 a month to do that. They'll test it, maintain the system. They're pretty self-sufficient, so owning one is great because you don't have to have that monthly cost as well. And then with the gas lines, I mean, we've kind of covered everything. The greatest thing is when the power goes out, you still can use as much gas as you need to keep your home heated.
Say you lose power for, 10, 12 hours during a -7-degree storm.
Yeah.
You know, the nice part is that you can run your gas stove without feeling like you're going to run out. If you have a propane deal,
you have to be a bit more careful.
Yeah, if you don't have it filled and you're at 30%, you can run through that pretty quickly on that side depending on how you're heating your home.
Electric is the next utility to consider, and so your options are going to be really just getting the city electric or solar if you want to be off-grid mountain man. So for city electric, that's the main source of electricity and going to be the most common. It's about $2,500 a pole to bring electricity out to a property if there's not it already. And the further your property is on the property, the further your home, is on the property, then the more it costs to bring it in because you're going to need more poles. Solar is an alternative option. You would need a battery bank though to store it. So, I mean, Colorado's great, over 300 plus days of sun, but you're going to be wasting that solar if you're not using it all the time if you don't have a battery bank. So, or if you have a week of cloudy weather, What are you going to do? So having that backup and having both is nice because then you can oftentimes be paying a tiny amount for electricity.
Yep.
And your solar is going into the grid.
Yep.
So, and then last is internet. So now, obviously, if you're like within, what'd you say, like, you don't even have to be like within city limits, like for internet. You don't, like you could be in the foothills.
For like Xfinity you're talking about?
Yeah, or like, yeah.
So, yeah, Xfinity doesn't go too far out on that side, and that's probably the best internet source here in Fort Collins, northern Colorado.
You think it's better than Fort Collins Connection?
Well, I was about to say that. Other than if you can go with the fiber and go Fort Collins Connection or go Pulse over in Loveland or some of those other areas, that is definitely the best way to go. But once you start reaching out further, Xfinity is one of the best options to look at. Once you get to a certain area, though, it does not work or they don't have the system set up. So then you can go to CenturyLink, which do not recommend at all. CenturyLink is one of the worst internets I've ever dealt with in my life when it comes to acreages. It is slow. It's one of those things where I could go and try and pull up a website and go get a coffee, go to the bathroom, make a little bit of dinner, go outside and fix a mower, and then come back in and the page might have been kind of loaded by that point. And so if you can have any option and you're looking at needing strong internet because you work from home or have to do any type of searching on the internet, 100% hands down, you got to go Starlink out here. There's other satellite internets you can use depending on how you feel about the world and what's going on. But just know that Starlink is your best option. My parents live out on Acreage where they don't have very good internet out there. We tried HughesNet they did it for 2 years. And just like I was stating before, they could go out and do a bunch of stuff before a page ever loaded, and then they come back and they can finally click on one link and then go do more stuff and wait for it to reload again. So Starlink is a game changer for having internet and being able to have that wiggle room out in the country.
And And the last thing we want to talk about is the house types to expect when looking for acreage properties, or ones that you could put on if you chose to start from scratch. And so the types are going to be a manufactured home. Those are really popular, especially I would say more out east.
Yep, they are becoming the new mobile home.
Yes.
Is how I would look at it. The
mobile
fancy home, one step above.
Yeah. Then there's mobile homes, custom or stick-built homes, and then tiny houses.
Yep.
And so manufactured can be cheaper material, and they're gonna need more maintenance over time, but really you get to save the upfront costs, and it's livable.
Yep.
And it is put on a foundation, or you can have a basement. So
Yep.
there's not too much different. Besides, I would just say like the customability, like it's pretty.
That's exactly it.
Spec, like it's stock.
Yep, you're
right?
going to get certain material. They have 5 or 6 models you're going to choose from. It's like working with a DR Horton, where you go to the manufacturer, they have them sitting out in their lot. They say, hey, which one do you want? And they'll build it in factory, drive it out on a truck, half and half as a piece, and then put it together on the foundation. And that's how the manufactured houses work. It's a great way to go to avoid the custom or stick-built cost.
Right. Then next is the mobile homes.
Yep.
And so, you kill me. So these can be built on a concrete slab. We're 2 options. You can build a concrete slab, wheel your house onto it.
Yep.
And as Connor said yesterday, slap some siding around the wheels, and there you go. The other option is you can also set it down on a crawl space or a basement.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And then last is custom built or stick built homes. So the reason we're saying the difference is because a custom build is the only way to build a stick built home on a piece of land is you're going to have a custom builder.
Yep.
And you can
that's
pick
the only way to do
everything. And she going to be bougie. Now they do have things you can choose from. Like I know, Noco Custom Homes. Is that one of them? Yeah. They have ones you can choose from.
Correct.
Stock homes. But for the most part, then there's high craft builders. I mean, that's truly what you want.
That's the caviar of homes out here.
Yes, high craft.
High craft. If you want, that multi-million-dollar home, hands down, that's the group I would go with, because they are truly attention detailed when it comes to building, where manufactured mobile homes, it's a little bit less.
A lot less. And then existing or stick-built homes are just going to be like regular homes you see. They're just on an acreage property.
Yep.
And so custom built will be the highest, most luxurious. Mobile will be the cheapest.
Yep, the most affordable way to get yourself out on a property and start enjoying it, and then build it over time as you want to. The barn dominium is the lifestyle that everybody seems to want to go with now these days if
barn
they can.
Dominium's huge.
And so if you can put a little mobile home out there and then build your barn dominium right behind it, that's always a good approach to take.
Yep. So in buying rural or acreage property in northern Colorado, honestly, this video has just scratched the surface. There's still so much more we could talk about. And it can be an intimidating process. And so that's why we're here. Do not hesitate to reach out to Connor or I if you're considering rural or acreage property in northern Colorado. We'd love nothing more than to walk through the steps with you and help you do something that's really exciting.
Yep, and just get ready for part 2 on that side. There's more stuff we want to continue to give you guys resource-wise to share with you and really fill you in on what it takes to get into an acreage, be a part of the acreage community, and know that when you get here to Colorado and we start looking for properties, that you know exactly what we're looking for when we're doing the tours.
Yep. And once you moved in, you're comfortable and you're knowledgeable about what you've just purchased.
Yep, exactly.
Till next time.
Peace.